Good afternoon, everyone. As you may know, my name is Joe Frampus. I'm a managing partner at Avasant. And as a managing partner, you have multiple things going on. First of all, if any of you that know me, I have no filters. So whatever goes on here will be very interesting. Second is I actually, as my partners tell me, I'm the office manager of our DC office. So we actually opened our DC office 3 months before COVID. Guess what? Guess who's the only one there? It's a great office. I also run a lot of our larger clients, and I have still responsibility for and oversee some things around retail, CPG, and manufacturing. So what we're going to talk about today is, I'll start, I have a couple of things that I want to start with. And it's really around trends around sourcing. And I'll go back, and again, I've been here since God, so I'll go back to the late 90s. And I did the original IBM AT&T deal. It took 90 days. Right after that, I did United Technologies and CSC. The CFO said, Joe, you have 72 days to do that, or you had to do that transaction. Did it in 65. But since then, if I look at RFPs, they have gone, in my opinion, a discouraging trend. They were, you could get them done 6 months, 7 months. Now, if I look at, and this is before COVID too, if I look at COVID, the trend was going, it's 9 or 10 months. And now, with COVID, it's even going higher. In fact, I'm in the throes of a deal right now. We've been at it for 10.5 months. First of all, my customer said, oh, Joe, you can't do it less than 18. I said, no. But it's like taking forever. And the reason, in my opinion, there are reasons for that. One is, you know, the lawyers take a lot of time. You have different organizations now involved. Rohan, third-party risk management. All of a sudden, third-party risk management organizations have shown up in companies that never existed before. Procurement has taken a very deep interest in all this. So, and all of a sudden, it's been very consensus-driven. So, and whereas before, you know, you had 1 or 2 people said, we're doing this. Now, it's freaking 20. So I'm kind of interested as we talk about, okay, we're talking about intelligent sourcing. Now, that's also the name of a magazine, but we're not talking about the magazine here. So David, I want to tell me a little bit, what do you think that is, and how does it relate in your organization at Providence?
So, can you all hear me? Is that good? I think point one, all sourcing should be intelligent. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but you know, we'll get there. In my mind, intelligent sourcing is when we as an organization are able to work with our partner, take a step back and say, what are we trying to do strategically together? And then how do we pull all the different levers to make that happen? How do we align the incentives, the actions, the outcomes to drive value for both sides in a way that's beyond just negotiating on price and volume? Right, like how do you get creative around equity investments in specific solutions or platforms, or going to market together, revenue share, things like that. That's how I see it, at least. I think there is a natural tension because, like you said, procurement's very excited about this. IT's very excited. Everybody's very excited, and you get into these 18-month processes where there's 100 people in the room, no decisions being made, and you need someone to take a step back and say, actually, we're going in this direction. This is why we're doing it. This is the global deal. And sort of putting aside all of that.
So Rohan, you run an organization of third-party risk management. Tell me a little bit about that, and then how does that relate to intelligent sourcing?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of background in terms of, you know, my role. So I've done a lot of strategic sourcing. I don't know if we would call it intelligent, but a lot of strategic sourcing. Also ran digital AI automation and now sort of risk management, trying to bring it all together. The challenge we see is we've got way too many stakeholders, as you're aware. And I think one of my key objectives is how do you break these barriers to force decisions to happen quickly, effectively, and efficiently. And I always go back to my teams with the 4 key drivers, right? Is this relationship, and I'm by the way, not a big fan of RFPs at all, right? If you can sit with a provider of your choosing and get to a good outcome, and that has to be based on one, is that partnership going to result in increasing revenue, client experience, operating leverage, obviously for the buy-side organizations, and how does it effectively manage risk? If you can take these 4 attributes and you can package that in a deal, everything else should be secondary. And at the end of the day, I always call it, third-party relationship management, because that is really, really the key. And that is my whole goal, is how do you optimize the deal structures and drive value as well as innovation? You can no longer, right, respond to an RFP through whatever tool, right, Reba, Scout, I don't know, Coupa, in those small little boxes with 8-size font. Nobody reads that. And that's really our goal.
So Peter, your title is like long. So tell us a little bit about your process outsourcing, what you're doing there, and what kind of sourcing are you doing?
Sure. So just as a background, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, just as a background, I was a good investment banker.
Yeah.
And then suddenly in 2001, one of our competitors, I was at Lehman Brothers at then, Goldman Sachs was doing something, Morgan Stanley across the street was doing something. The controller of banking in IBD Group, where I belonged to, became the CFO. And I happened to attend a breakfast in 2001 in Manhattan with the founder of one of the largest global sourcing firm. So I was told that you are the expert. I did not know anything. So that's how, from banking, I did banking, front office, middle office, back office. Third parties, built ODCs, built the captives. Moved to insurance, very different from banking. Commercial, consumer, managed providers around the world and the captives around the world. Then I got a call to come and join pharma, very, very different. Very different from all these companies. So the experience taught me, whether you call it intelligent sourcing or whatever, it's always good to put many heads to make a decision. And that's why you need advisors, you need partners, you need a process. It brings in transparency. The corporate executives, my career has been always in the corporate. As a corporate executive, they know the decision, but they want to make an intelligent decision.
Are they scared to make that decision?
No, they know the decision, what they're going to make. They just need to validate that decision. And that's why people like Avasant or other companies help in making that decision.
David?
How do you balance that, though, with getting things done in an expedient way?
So I'll tell you, if you have globalization of service, you don't play around with it. You don't mess around with it. Mm-hmm. If you once decide to do something, say build a captive in Philippines, you can't get out. The government will be after you. So the right decision is very, very important. So in terms of the speed?
Yeah, how do you balance it?
Yeah, the experience, the people in the corporate have always done it before. They know the decision. The speed comes there having done mistakes before. I myself have done mistakes. In 2002, I sent a Wall Street call center to a third party. Every month, we lost $1 million and brought it back in 3 months. So wow. The speed comes with having the scars and mistakes and the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Peter, but one comment, right? I think we can't generalize, right? So something as putting a captive or a GIC will require 18 months, right? But not all decisions, especially in the realm today of, whether it's financial services or insurance, need that much amount of time, right? So in your experience, how do we right-size the process for what we are actually the decision we're trying to make and the product or the service we're trying to leverage?
Yeah. So the boundary between what's outside and inside has got blurry. Today, I have my colleagues. Genpact is the client and most trusted partner. They help us. They help us. They help us in the decision. We have others also, just to bring transparency in the process. They help us in the process. So regarding the time frame, it does cut the collective experience of a third party, of an advisor, and the firm executive. It does cut. You know, I got the job in my current company because I had done it before. I can bet when people are hired in big corporations, you want to hire somebody who has done it before and lived through the consequence and probably can cut the time as well. There is a critical time. Captive used to take 3 years to build to get to 1,000 people. Now you can get to 1,000 in a year.
So I want to add on to a little bit what Rohan said and talk about that. And again, I love to talk stories, right? So 7 or 8 years ago, I actually attended an industry conference, and the keynote was a professor. And this is 8 years ago, and he said, "Oh, the RFP is dead." And so I was sitting there and I was asking him if he was on Fantasy Island or whatever hallucinogenics he was talking about. And 8 years later, the RFP is still strong. In fact, it's getting worse. Everybody's RFPing something. And I don't know why, but the thing about it is, and then I go on to, and I look at my client profile. I have 2 major retail clients in Europe. They both have about, in fact, the one has 200 vendors. And I go look at the top 10 vendors, they are 65% of their spend. I go to the other one, which is $500 million in spend with a third party. 7 of them almost constitute 75% of their spend. So the tails of the other 100 are like this, because they're not consolidating. And then when you do further analysis, you look at it and say, "Oh my God, I have 7 cloud vendors. Oh, I have 10 security vendors." I'm going, why? So, and it's because they continue to do RFPs. So why, and I ask you, do you have a tail like that? And why are you not looking at that and looking at sole source? What is the bugaboo about sole source? I'll start with you. Okay, Rohan.
I'll take it.
Go start.
I'll take it. I said sole source. So here's the challenge, right? And it's a little bit of the organizations get within companies, right? The organizations have to justify their value. So running RFPs becomes a key metric or a key indicator. I'll ask the audience this, right? In my experience, after an RFP, there's only about less than 10% where you actually move away from the incumbent. So you've got a host of providers here, a host of advisors, right? You can go through the entire process only to give business to the incumbent. And that, I believe, is a tremendous amount of waste of value created. You would rather, it's expensive. It's expensive for the provider. It's expensive for the client. You got to do all of these evaluations. You got to pull 60 people in a room to do the evaluations. You are almost better off taking their pool of money, investing it or co-investing it in actually getting value out of it, right? It could be value through automation. It could be value through better reporting. It could be just value through free services. So that's really where it becomes an organizational construct where what is the goal and how is a particular procurement organization measured?
But before you reply to that, David, so why aren't you then looking at those people and saying, if only 10% of an RFP goes out to someone other than the incumbent, why would anyone ever bid? Why would you actually allow that to happen?
In my mind, what I see is there's a lot of metrics behind the numbers, right? Well, how many, for example, how many diverse suppliers did you extend it to? There are lots of organizational metrics that are measured as a result of it, right? So you've got to have some sort of a balance to manage the portfolio. But if you again look at it, right, there's majority of, I still believe that majority of the deals are getting sole source, especially those that are going through renewals, because to your point, right, RFP process takes 18 months, you end up, renewing the contract for another 12 months. So you're in that continuous cycle, right? So it never actually ends catching up. And by that time, you've got leadership changes. You have a new leader that comes along, and you sort of go back and start the process all over again. And that's actually just what happens, right? I mean, you've seen instances of that.
I believe me. David?
The thing that I would add to your sort of people justifying their existence, if you will, at least what I have seen is it's a massive CYA.
Yeah.
There's a risk aversion. No one wants to make the decision. And so they go through this process because, at least at Providence, we are a very consensus-driven culture. We have 120,000 employees, so everybody wants to be at the table. No one wants to pull the trigger. And so they go through these processes that take 18 months to get to a pilot phase. And then it takes another 6 months of evaluation. And there have been examples where the head of IT or whomever have said, no, we are going with Microsoft, period. Like, sole source, like, we're moving forward. But it is very rare.
Peter, you've been quiet.
So the organizations today, the outsiders come in. In my organization, in pharma where I belong, it's all outsiders. Outsiders come in and they want to change. So the incumbents who are there, their existence is being challenged because the outsiders come in, not because they have a preference, but because they say, have we gone to the market? Have we gone to the market to look at what is possible? So not necessarily always firms look at existing providers. I know there are factors like the trust is built, they know our domain, they know how things work, they know the infrastructure, that's a plus. But also if you're not looking beyond the incumbents, you may be missing something. So it's not always that I had somebody for 15 years and the 16th, another 3 years, we will have that. That's why we have the RFP. It takes a long time. The 2020, I did an RFP, and I'm not a procurement person, by the way. In the company, in a corporate, procurement has the role, the business leaders have a role. So I'm from the business side, which has to deliver something. Procurement helps us in the process, but it is expensive. It took me 8 months in 2020, but we got one of the great contracts.
So if procurement is responsible for it, okay, then why is still taking so long? If you're saying the business, they deal with the business, procurement is coming in, they're going to run that RFP process or whatever that is, why are they taking so long?
They should not be taking so long.
David?
I would say that at least where I see it taking long is when the business says we're going to run the RFP and they don't give it to procurement, and procurement actually has a well-oiled process that they run through.
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
In my mind, our procurement org actually does a very good job of running it quickly. It's when the business says we're going to run the RFP independent of procurement, then things just go haywire.
Okay, so there we go. Okay, so let's. Oh my God. So let's talk a little bit about your partners and the service providers that you do. Do you have strategic partners and tactical? How does your sourcing work in that regard? And how do you consider someone to be tactical versus strategic? Start with you, David.
I mean, for me, it's just a question of how many levers are you pulling to align the organization to the outcomes that you want. If it's just we're going to ask for a 3% escalator every year or just keep on negotiating on price, that is a more tactical relationship. If we are actually doing joint investments, like joint roadmap development, you sort of go down the list.
Does anything to do with about spend with that particular provider?
We have both small and large strategic partnerships.
Okay.
I would say we also have very large tactical partnerships where they're just in that category and it's just the 3% rate every year.
So Rohan, how do you evaluate because you're now third-party risk management, so how do you evaluate those suppliers and those providers that you determine that would be a strategic or a tactical partner for you?
I think you obviously have got to do it in partnership with the business, right? But today, if you think about the industry is changing, it's no longer, just outsourcing of operations. It's no longer, it's a combination of tools, technologies, which include AI automation. You think about a simple function, right? How do you make your collections more efficient? It's all about the client experience. It's all about ensuring that you are complying with the laws and regs. It's all about bringing in different types of machine learning solutions, whichever is the partner, and you got to co-innovate with them, right? You can't just say, go do this for me, because the specs don't exist. They have to take your institutional's data, they have to safeguard it in a manner that is aligned with all the security practices, and then they've got to come up with solutions. You can't RFP that kind of thing. It's very difficult to RFP those, especially those type of objectives. Now, what you can RFP is rate cards, right? This is really the whole discussion between managed services and just, sort of staff aug, right? Year over year, everybody's asking for 3% discounts on rate card. Give me a full stack developer, and I don't want the cost to be more than, blah. Well, that's not going to be effective long term. Now, how many full stack developers do we have that have got over 10 or 12 years of experience that want to come and do? They got to go work for Apple and Google, right? But that's the question that's been asked in the RFP, and I go like, what? Wow, right? Then you get into, this is a term, right? BIPS, right? It's not basis point spread. I call it the battered provider syndrome, right? That's when providers get beaten up on cost and price, and there goes your value proposition out of the door. So how do you bring all of that together to create more value?
But it sounds like you're still creating the RFP, so you're still having them, even though it sounds like you're against it, right? But you still are forced to create an RFP because of the rest of your organization.
Yeah, so it just boils down to eventually, how much cloud do the executives, are going to have, right? And how many RFPs have already gone through where is some sort of a quota met, right? I think in many cases, RFP is a great way to learn, is a great way to, bid out things that are very unambiguous, that can easily be quantified and can be sustained year over year. But if you start looking at platforms and solutions and combining many different things, it becomes very difficult, and it takes an elongated cycle to do it, right? So at some point in time, you got to have a decision-making process in terms of when and what types of product solutions do you want to RFP out versus what is, sort of simple and easy to RFP out. And that, I think, is a organizational decision. Some people put it in the category strategy, which I'm not necessarily sure that is where it belongs, but it does become a business decision that needs to be informed through some data points. And that policy, that framework needs to be built for every organization, for the organization to be successful, and do it in a limited period of time to get the value proposition. Otherwise, you lose the value proposition.
Good. Okay, so I have another question for you. So we have a number of potential partners, suppliers, providers out here in the audience today. So what would you tell them when you're looking at RFP? What would you ask them to differentiate themselves? Is it through partnership, innovation, cost effectiveness? What would you advise them as they are coming in and replying maybe to an RFP?
I think that's the challenge, right? I think people these days go, and it's been forever, but eventually you go into the business because of trust, relationship, and partnership. And I think those are some of the challenges that it's very hard to do it within the RFP unless the organizations that are actually facilitating the process allow for good amount of dialogue, good amount of conversation, and it should be stimulating versus stifling. I think that is the big difference in how you run the process to allow for co-innovation. You could still do it within the confines of the RFP, but it needs more dialogue and discussion as opposed to sort of passing, some sort of a, spreadsheet back and forth, right? I think that is what is missing today. And I think that will definitely help.
Peter. What do you think?
I think Rohan said it right. It's the trust that is there. But let me.
So how do they get the trust? How do they, because let's face it, you know, I'm an advisor, I'm usually facilitating part of these things. How do they feel the trust of you, because you're either beating them down on solution, beating them down on price, beating them down on an MSA, says, oh, I want unlimited liability, so, you know, so how do you get them to build that trust?
So I'll tell you, business leaders never beat down on the price.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The procurement plays the price, but the business leader, in the end of the day, I'm supposed to deliver 100% delivery in things like COVID. So we don't beat the partner in price. And if you ask personally, where I have grown in the industry, I have grown, everybody needs to make money. So you have to first understand that. This is from the business side. In Citigroup, where I was, how do you get the trust?
Mm-hmm.
Each one of us have moved from companies to companies, right? We have friends in other companies, executives like myself. First thing I make a call to somebody and they tell me the whole story. So the trust builds because you have been dealing and they have been delivering, whether it was in Lehman Brothers, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, AIG, or Johnson & Johnson, or in Merck. So we know the companies. I know I have a partner today who is the #1 F&A. So we choose a company who are the #1 in the street. My friends have told me, I have experienced personally, and that's how we build the trust. The other way we build the trust, there are 4 things that the corporate leaders, the business leaders look at. We don't look at the price. Price is procurement. We look first as client reference, second is domain knowledge, third is quality of deliverable, and fourth is flexibility. That's how senior executives make the decision and get the trust.
So it's all about value.
Yeah.
So then how do you translate that value to procurement to say, stop?
Those are they're really fun conversations.
Pardon me?
They're really fun conversations.
Oh, I don't think so. David?
I don't have a great answer, but I think you kind of need to say that at a certain point. We've taken a step back. We've looked at the global view of it. We think there is more value for the organization. Certainly, like they can do independent, like local maximization of that specific contract to get the best out of that. But it's our job as leaders to take a step back and say, no, we're good, because we see the entire picture.
Now, that's a good point. Now, I know a lot of procurement organizations that are very talented, very good, and where the business side just isn't. So how do you fix that? Or how do you help that along? Because they do a very good job, they're very efficient about it, but then you have the business side that just not quite there. Well, unfortunately, I've seen everything, good, better, and in the ugly. So, but it's out there. There are people out there in positions that don't belong there.
Yeah, I'll try to give an answer. I think at the end of the day, you got to level set the expectations even with the heads of procurement in terms of what is the driver for why you're engaging a third party, right? It goes back to saying, do you really want to, how far do you want to go on to price before the delivery starts having problems? And what are the actual benchmarks? Because at the end of the day, if you look at the deal and it's not set up for success, and it is not right, let's say risk rated, it's not right value rated, then 3-6 months down the line, you're going to have a problem. And then you're going to require more work, right? So I think at the outset, it's important to have those conversations and guardrails. And the one metric which I think has to change is what is the definition of savings, for example, right? Which might be at the heart of the procurement mindset, and how does you transform that into a true value proposition, right? Do you put metrics in place which says, hey, by the way, this deal was good if for 3 years there was no amendment needed because we missed something? Well, that should be a good metric. But I don't believe those metrics exist today because the conditions change. So if you start infusing some of those metrics at the outset, and even those agreements and conversations where you're in a room, you're making those decisions as opposed to sort of a double blind, where your information is being passed back and forth. I think those are some of the value levers that today get missed out.
Do you find that people can weaponize that a little bit internally? So they can create ambiguous sources of value that don't necessarily materialize because they're very hand-wavy to make the deal look more attractive?
It goes back to having the right people with the right lens, right? I think, if you're thinking about sort of, is someone blowing up smoke, you need to have smoke detectors that can say, hey, this is, and you got to have experts, right? You think about the whole notion of AI automation and that whole, machine learning can do miracles. It can, right? But how does that translate into your use case? So you need to have enough smoke detectors to be able to respond, and you need to have guardrails, whether it's enterprise architects in the company. Mm-hmm. And again, how do you pull all of those stakeholders to make good decisions, especially when it comes to technology?
I'm going to ask one final question, and it's really around today, there's still a lot of people that don't outsource, and you still see first generation, but more and more you're seeing second, third, and even fourth generation sourcing agreements. Now, how do you look at those? Because the savings are gone. The savings were on the first one. They weren't in the second one or after that. So I think as business leaders, you're looking for value. So how do you translate that, at least second and third generations, from a procurement organization that still thinks that they're going to get savings? Peter.
So the business leaders thinks in terms of the value that translate to saving. They don't necessarily think of saving coming from cutting the rate of a vendor. They look at the saving, the value that the service provider provides, and how does that result. In terms of, I can tell you examples in banking or insurance, better policy admin system in insurance, better analytics in fixed income trading, or if you come to Merck, is the factories that produce drug just in time, and how do you do supply chain management, all that stuff. So they are looking value which is a lot greater than cutting the rate by a few dollars. We don't believe in that. Again, my mindset is of the business side. I was taught by my bosses, better is cheaper, cheaper is not better.
Maybe you should become a chief procurement officer.
Right.
So I think it's the saying that goes, right. If you think about the trifecta, right, good, fast, cheap, right. You can't really get all three of them together, mm-hmm. And at the midpoint of that triangle is actually that's value, mm-hmm. And so as long as you can set those guardrails right. For about 4 or 5 years, I wore the business leader hat, trying to lead the digital transformation, the change management agenda, automation, AI, trying to deliver value for our business partners, right? To me, cost didn't matter as much because what we would get as a throughput as a result of delivery would be tremendous in terms of value. So you got to balance. You just the good, fast, cheap just doesn't work together.
Yep. David, final words.
I was just going to say I wouldn't add anything in addition to either of those. So, I think what you said earlier, at a certain point, it's a fair cost to pay, and so we're going to pay it. And taking that step back and saying we don't care about the 50-cent reduction in unit price just because it's not worth it from a value perspective is right.
Sometimes you should always ask the question, right? So whether you're a business leader and you're working with your procurement and you're working with your partner, ask the question, if we don't take this to bid and we do a sole source engagement, what is the value that we can actually generate by having that conversation? I don't even think those conversations happen. It's almost like at times more of a threat. Well, I'm going to just take it to an RFP, and I think that sort of lays the foundation of that relationship and makes it very shaky. And that could because you've got new leadership in, somebody else has just come in from the outside. So there could be other factors, but I think we owe ourselves this one question, right? Can we make this happen? Because the cost of replacing an incumbent is too expensive. And you waste a lot of time.
Even though it happens all the time.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, thank you. Everyone, thank you for listening.
Big round of applause to our panelists and amazing moderators.